If you are the kind of person who constantly finds yourself wanting to understand the deep, profound meat of Christian theology, you, you probably also know the frustration of wading through dry academic jargon to get there. We see you, we know you, and this deep dive is built specifically for you.
Yeah, we really want to bridge that gap today because the concepts we're looking at are they're incredible.
Exactly. Today, we are extracting what might be the most mind-bending, faith-shaping insights from a truly fascinating doctrinal text. It's called The Sanctuary, God's Eternal Home and Cosmic Command Center.
And it is a dense text, but it is so rewarding if you stick with it.
Right. And my role today is to be exactly where you are listening to this. I'm the curious believer trying to connect these massive theological concepts to reality. And joining me to navigate all of this is our resident theology expert who's going to help us synthesize this material.
I'm very excited to get into this one because today we are talking about a massive paradigm shift regarding how we view the entire architecture of heaven and the timeline of God's presence.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the central premise of this text challenges a very common assumption. I mean, most of us who have spent time in church hear the words sanctuary or tabernacle, and we just immediately relegate it to an Old Testament typology.
Yeah, it becomes just a historical footnote.
Right. We treat it as a temporary pedagogical tool, a physical metaphor for Jesus saving us from sin. You know, the animal sacrifices point to the cross, the priests point to Jesus, and once the cross happens, the sanctuary is basically obsolete.
But the source material argues something much, much more expansive. It posits that the sanctuary existed long before sin ever entered the universe, that it was functioning as God's literal home and the cosmic command center of reality.
That's a huge shift.
It is the core disruption this text introduces, and it forces us to completely reevaluate our timeline of the divine reality. Because think about it, if we only view the sanctuary through the lens of human sin, we make the entire structure reactive.
We assume God only built a command center because humans messed up, right? Like
Yeah.
he needed a staging ground for a rescue mission.
Exactly. But the source material roots the origin of the sanctuary in what it calls the Emmanuel principle. To trace this back to its foundation, we can look at the very first time God gives instructions to build a physical sanctuary on earth. This is found in Exodus chapter 25, verse 8.
And what does that instruction actually say?
The instruction is incredibly simple, but it carries massive philosophical weight. God says, "Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them."
That I may dwell among them.
Right. And when you pair that ancient Hebrew instruction with the later prophetic declaration in Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14.
Oh, the famous promise of Emmanuel.
Yes, Emmanuel, which literally translates to God is with us. When you put those together, you start to see a cohesive, overarching motive. The incarnation of Christ is certainly the climax of that principle, but the text argues that God's ultimate goal from the absolute dawn of creation has always been proximity.
He wants to be close to us.
Precisely. He is a God defined by relational love, and love inherently desires closeness. The sanctuary doctrine, before it ever deals with managing a sin problem, is the architectural embodiment of God's desire for fellowship with his creation.
Okay, that makes perfect sense on a relational level, but it raises a massive logistical question about the earthly structure that Moses actually built out there in the wilderness.
What kind of question?
Well, if the goal is simply proximity, just being close to the people, why the hyper-specific dimensions? Why the specific goal, the certain fabrics, the compartmentalized rooms? When Moses is out there building this elaborate tent, where is he getting the design? Like, is the earthly sanctuary the prototype, or is he working off a pre-existing schematic?
He is absolutely working off a pre-existing schematic. And the biblical text is surprisingly explicit about this. Just one verse after God tells Moses to build the sanctuary, in Exodus chapter 25, verse 9, the instruction narrows.
What does it say?
It says, "Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you."
Exactly like the pattern.
Yes, and the author of Hebrews in the New Testament leans heavily into the specific detail. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 5 notes that the earthly priests serve in a sanctuary that is a copy and shadow of what is in heaven. The writer of Hebrews actually quotes that Exodus passage, reminding the reader that Moses was instructed to make everything according to the pattern shown to him on the mountain.
So Moses was shown a blueprint.
A literal blueprint. The source text we are analyzing zeroes in on the Hebrew word used in Exodus for pattern, which is tabnet.
Tabnet.
Right. This isn't just a vague idea or a spiritual concept. Tabnet implies a literal model or a structural blueprint. Moses was shown a miniature representation of a reality that already existed in the heavenly realm. The earthly tabernacle was merely a shadow cast by the ultimate reality.
Wow. So Moses didn't invent the architecture.
Not at all. He was essentially an ancient contractor building a scale model of God's actual pre-existing heavenly headquarters.
You realize that significantly alters the hierarchy of reality, right? We generally default to thinking of the earthly physical temple as the real thing, while heaven is this vague, ethereal, spiritualized space.
It does. It flips it completely upside down.
Yeah, this argument suggests the exact opposite. The earthly tent was the rudimentary temporary model, and the heavenly sanctuary is the dense, permanent original.
Hmm.
But this brings me back to the timeline issue.
Right, the timeline.
If this heavenly structure existed before humans, before the fall, before the concept of sin even existed, what was its function? For those of us familiar with theology, we are used to looking at the sanctuary purely through the lens of soteriology, which is the study of salvation.
Stereology, yes.
But if there were no sinners to save, what was the activity actually happening in this space?
The author of our text introduces a phrase to answer that exact question, and it is a brilliant synthesis of the timeline. The phrase is, before soteriology was doxology.
Doxology, meaning praise and worship.
Exactly. Doxology is the practice of praise and worship. The prophet Jeremiah gives us a glimpse into this pre-fall reality. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 12, describes a glorious throne set on high from the beginning as the place of our sanctuary.
Set on high from the beginning.
What's fascinating here is that phrase, from the beginning. It pushes the timeline back way before Genesis chapter 3. Before there was ever a rebellion or a need for an atoning sacrifice, the original function of the heavenly sanctuary was a place of assembly.
So it was like a divine gathering place.
It was a divine palace where the unfallen universe, the angelic beings, and other unfallen creations gathered to worship their creator. It was a hub of pure, unfiltered joy, connection, and administration. The command center was originally filled with music and fellowship, not the blood of sacrifices.
If we accept that the heavenly sanctuary was originally a place of pure doxology, it makes the origin of evil that much more shocking. I mean, our source text places the origin of Satan directly inside this heavenly space, specifically inside the most holy place.
Yes, right in the center of it all.
Because when we read passages like Ezekiel chapter 28 and Isaiah chapter 14, they initially seem to be talking about earthly political figures, right? Like the king of Tyre or the king of Babylon. But then the language elevates into something purely cosmic.
It does, and that linguistic elevation is critical to understanding the text's argument about the origin of the cosmic conflict. If you look at the Hebrew text of Ezekiel chapter 28, the first 10 verses address the earthly ruler of Tyre, calling him the prince, or Nagid.
Nagid. So that's just a human political leader.
Right. But starting in verse 11, the terminology dramatically shifts. The prophet is told to take up a lamentation for the king of Tyre, using the word Melech. Suddenly, the prophet is describing the supernatural power operating behind the earthly throne.
What does the text actually say about him?
The text says, "You are the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God," it goes on to say. "You were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you."
Okay, the earthly prince of Tyre was certainly not a created perfect cherub walking in Eden.
No, absolutely not. This is a clear, undeniable description of Lucifer before his fall.
And the phrase, the anointed cherub who covers, is incredibly specific. For anyone familiar with the earthly sanctuary model, that immediately brings up a very distinct visual.
It paints a very clear picture of where he was stationed.
Right, because in the deepest part of the earthly tabernacle, the most holy place, sat the Ark of the Covenant, representing God's localized presence. And covering the top of that ark were two golden cherubim with their wings stretched out. If the earthly is a copy of the heavenly, then calling Lucifer the cherub who covers implies he wasn't just in heaven.
No, he was stationed in the absolute inner sanctum. That is the staggering reality the text wants us to grasp. Lucifer literally stood right next to the throne of God in the heavenly holy of holies. He had the highest possible access.
So he was right there at the center of power.
Isaiah chapter 14, verses 13 and 14, expands on this location, referring to it as the Mount of Assembly. Lucifer boasts, "I will sit on the Mount of Assembly, I will make myself like the Most High." He wasn't a distant enemy attacking the walls of a fortress from the outside.
To use a modern political analogy, this is like an inner circle cabinet member with top-level security clearance. Like
Exactly.
someone stationed right inside the Oval Office who just decides to stage a coup.
Yeah.
The betrayal happened in the most intimate, sacred space in the universe.
Which makes the rebellion so much more insidious.
Absolutely. But before we get into the mechanics of how a perfect being in a perfect place decides to rebel, we really need to clarify the nature of this place. We keep using terms like space, architecture, and command center.
And that can be confusing for a lot of people today.
Right, because there's a strong tendency in modern thought to treat anything heavenly as purely metaphorical. We just assume heaven is a state of mind or a formless, non-material spiritual dimension. But the source material aggressively pushes back against that, arguing for a spatio-temporal reality.
It does, and it identifies the root of that formless, ethereal view of heaven as Platonic dualism.
Platonic dualism. Let's break that down for the listener.
Sure, this Greek philosophical framework, championed by Plato, essentially argued that spiritual things are abstract, timeless, and formless, while physical matter is inherently temporary, flawed, and inferior.
So physical equals bad, spiritual equals good.
That's the basic idea. And unfortunately, over the centuries, elements of that Greek philosophy seeped into Christian theology. It led to this cultural myth that heaven is just formless spirits floating in a white, hazy nothingness.
Playing harps on clouds.
Exactly. But the biblical worldview does not treat the physical as inherently bad. Remember, God created the physical universe and called it very good. The expert text forces us to recognize that God actually enters space and time to dwell in a real, tangible place. Heaven has geography. It has dimensionality.
The author references C.S. Lewis's allegorical novel, The Great Divorce, which is probably one of the best thought experiments for this concept.
I love that book. It perfectly illustrates this point.
In that book, Lewis completely flips our normal assumptions about the afterlife. When the ghosts from a gray, shadowy hell take a bus trip to the outskirts of heaven, they find that they are the ones who are transparent and insubstantial.
They're like smoke.
Right, and heaven itself, the grass, the trees, the water, is so dense, so solid, and so incredibly real that it actually hurts the transparent ghost to walk on the grass. The theological point is that heavenly reality isn't less tangible than earth. It is more tangible. The earthly realm is the shadow. Heaven is the dense reality.
That Lewis analogy perfectly captures the essence of a spatio-temporal heaven. The author of our source text even shares a humorous anecdote from his former seminary professor, Gerhard F. Hassel.
Oh, this is great. What did he say?
Hassel used to tease his graduate students by claiming he knew the exact molecular composition of the heavenly sanctuary. He would build up the suspense, letting them wait for some profound Greek or Hebrew revelation, and then finally declare, it's made of heavenly stuff.
Heavenly stuff.
It's a joke, of course, but it carries profound theological weight. It insists that the heavenly sanctuary is constructed of real, tangible material. It's just of a higher, unimaginable quality that our current finite physics can't fully comprehend.
If we accept that there is literal heavenly stuff, then the tour of the heavenly sanctuary shown to the prophets becomes a tour of a real facility. The Apostle John, in the book of Revelation, gets taken up in a vision and sees the heavenly counterparts to the earthly furniture Moses built.
Yes, John gets an actual tour of the command center.
In Revelation chapter 4, verse 5, John sees 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne. That's the reality behind the earthly lampstand. In chapter 8, verse 3, he sees an angel with a golden censer at the golden altar which was before the throne. That's the heavenly altar of incense. And in chapter 11, verse 19, the temple of God is opened in heaven, and the ark of his covenant was seen in his temple.
Now, we have to connect this back to the timeline we discussed earlier. If these furnishings existed before sin, before anyone needed saving, their original purpose couldn't have been entirely tied to atonement.
Because there was no sin to atone for yet.
Exactly. A lampstand or a table of bread had to have a function in an unfallen universe. The text suggests that originally, these elements were about aesthetics, fellowship, and divine hospitality.
Divine hospitality, I like that.
Think about how we view major seats of government today. Places like the White House in the United States, the Casa Rosada in Argentina, or the Palacio de Alvorada in Brazil. What are those structures?
They're the centers of power, where the laws are made and the country is run.
They are administrative command centers where the geopolitical affairs of a nation are managed, but they are simultaneously homes. The leader of the nation lives there with their family. They host state dinners there. They have private living rooms and parlors.
That dual function is a great way to understand the sanctuary. It's the command center of the cosmos, but it's also a residence.
Exactly. The table of the presence, which held the bread in the earthly model, represents the heavenly dining room. It was designed for intimate table fellowship between the Creator and his beings. The lampstand is akin to a grand chandelier in the heavenly living room, providing illumination for reflection and connection. The altar of incense is like a parlor, permeated with the sweet, inviting fragrance of Christ's character.
So God constructed a home to invite his created friends into.
Yes, he is not just a distant, calculating CEO running the universe from a sterile boardroom. He is a host.
But bridging the gap between an infinite, uncreated God and finite, created beings requires more than just a welcoming building. There's an inherent ontological gap there. I mean, how does a finite angel or a finite human safely interact with an infinite God whose sheer glory could literally be consuming?
That is the ultimate theological question.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text addresses this by introducing a profoundly deep exploration of what Christ was doing before the fall of humanity. It takes us into the book of Proverbs, specifically chapter 8, which discusses a figure personified as wisdom.
Proverbs chapter 8 is an absolute cornerstone text for understanding the pre-incarnate role of the Son of God. For centuries, Orthodox Christian theology has recognized this passage not merely as poetic personification, but as a literal description of the second person of the Godhead before the incarnation.
Let's read what it says.
Proverbs chapter 8, starting in verse 22, reads, "The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way, before his works of old. I have been established from everlasting, from the beginning, before there was ever an earth." It continues, "When he prepared the heavens, I was there. Then I was beside him as a master craftsman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and my delight was with the sons of men."
Now, modern critical scholars often push back on that interpretation, arguing that Solomon is simply writing a Hebrew poem extolling the virtue of being wise, and that imposing Jesus onto this text is anachronistic. How does the source material justify reading this as a distinct divine person, rather than just a metaphor?
The justification lies in the grammar and the theological context of the claims being made. The text points out that the wisdom speaking in Proverbs chapter 8 claims prerogatives that, throughout the entirety of Hebrew scripture, are reserved exclusively for Yahweh.
What kind of prerogatives?
This figure claims to be the source of revelation, the giver of life, and the one who grants legitimate authority to human rulers. Furthermore, Proverbs chapter 30, verse 4, poses a series of rhetorical questions about the Creator. It asks, who has ascended into heaven or descended? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, and what is his son's name, if you know?
What is his son's name? That is a massive textual indicator of a divine son in the Old Testament.
It really is. Additionally, the author notes that in Proverbs chapter 8, verse 12, the Hebrew phrase often translated I, wisdom, is much more accurately rendered, I am wisdom. This is a divine self-declaration formula, structurally parallel to God declaring, I am Yahweh.
So wisdom is declaring divine identity.
Yes. The theological term for this is a hypostasis. Instead of just being an abstract attribute, like saying a human is the embodiment of patience, an attribute of God is revealed to be a distinct, self-conscious, divine person.
And when we cross the bridge into the New Testament, the apostles explicitly map this master craftsman language directly onto Jesus.
They do it over and over again.
John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 declares, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made through him." Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 and 16 expands on this, stating that the Son is the image of the invisible God, and by him all things were created in heaven and on earth. The New Testament writers clearly understood Jesus to be the wisdom of Proverbs chapter 8.
But here is where the argument of our source text becomes truly breathtaking. We understand that the Son of God was the co-creator, but the text suggests that at the moment of creation, the Son underwent a form of kenosis.
Kenosis, which means an emptying or a voluntary stepping down.
Exactly. We usually apply the concept of kenosis, found in Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 11, to the incarnation, the moment when Jesus became a human being in Bethlehem. But the source material, drawing on Revelation chapter 13, verse 8, which calls Jesus the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, suggests that a foundational act of condescension happened long before the cross.
Even before the fall of humanity.
Yes. The Son was installed, the Hebrew verb is nesak, into the office of mediator at the very dawn of creation.
Okay, using the word mediator before the existence of sin feels contradictory to me. In our modern lexicon, a mediator is a conflict resolution specialist, someone who steps in when two parties, like a labor union and management, are at odds. If there was no sin, there was no conflict. So what exactly was the Son mediating?
We have to strip away the modern, purely legalistic definition of mediation. In a broader ontological sense, a mediator is a bridge. It is a connecting link between two fundamentally different realities.
So it's about connecting the infinite and the finite.
Precisely. Consider the vast, incomprehensible gap between the uncreated, infinite, eternal God and the finite, limited creatures he just brought into existence. How do finite beings comprehend or interact with an infinite God without being overwhelmed by his unapproachable light?
They need a buffer, a safe way to interface.
And the Son of God voluntarily stepped into that ontological gap. He condescended to become the communication link, the bridge, so that the created universe could safely and intimately interact with the Almighty. Mediation wasn't a reactionary Plan B implemented because humans sinned. It was Plan A for how the Creator intended to interface with his creation from day one.
To make that interface possible, the text proposes a highly speculative but genuinely fascinating theological possibility regarding how the Son manifested himself to the angelic host. It explores the Michael connection.
Yes, and we must approach this carefully, distinguishing between taking on a form versus changing one's divine nature. Throughout the Old Testament, the pre-incarnate Christ frequently appears in a specialized role known as the angel of the Lord.
A figure who speaks as God and accepts worship as God.
Exactly. The text suggests that in order to bridge the gap between infinite God and finite angels, the Son of Man may have taken the form of an angel. He is identified in several passages as Michael, a name which is actually a question. Who is like God?
And Jude verse 9 mentions Michael explicitly.
It does. In Jude verse 9, Michael is explicitly called the archangel, which simply means the chief messenger or the head of the angelic host. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16 states that the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel.
Now, some listeners might hear the word angel applied to Jesus and immediately worry about heresy, thinking this reduces Christ to a created being. But you are distinguishing between the ontological nature of the Son, who is fully God, and the form he voluntarily assumed to lead the heavenly host.
Precisely. It is the exact same theological principle as the incarnation. When the Word became flesh and dwelt among us as a human, he did not cease to be fully God. He took on the form of humanity to connect with humans. The text posits that he similarly took on the form of the chief angel to connect with the angels.
Let's visualize how this dynamic sets the stage for the cosmic conflict. Earlier, we established that there were two covering cherubim standing next to the throne in the heavenly Holy of Holies. One was Lucifer, the created being. The text suggests the other may have been the Son of God operating in the form of Michael.
Think about the tension that creates. You have these two incredibly glorious beings stationed on the Mount of Assembly right beside the throne. In terms of outward form, they might have looked very similar. Both are associated with brilliant light.
Lucifer's name means morning star. And interestingly, in Revelation chapter 22 and 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 19, Jesus is also referred to as the morning star.
But while their forms may have been similar, their natures were infinitely different. One was the eternal creator who had voluntarily stooped down in an act of profound humility to mediate. The other was a brilliant but finite created being.
Which brings us to the psychological origin of evil. How does a perfect being standing in a flawless environment surrounded by a perfectly loving God decide to launch a rebellion? We really have to look at the internal mechanics of Lucifer's fall because it explains so much about the nature of sin itself.
The answer lies in the Hebrew terminology of Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 15 through 18. Verse 15 states, "You are perfect in your ways from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you."
Till iniquity was found in you.
The specific Hebrew word chosen for iniquity here is Allah. While it can mean general unrighteousness, its primary foundational meaning is injustice, or a sense of unfairness.
So Lucifer's initial stumble wasn't an outward act of violence. It was an internal perception of injustice. He felt he was being treated unfairly by the divine administration.
Yes. Consider the dynamic we just mapped out. You have Michael, the Son of God, and you have Lucifer. Lucifer observes Michael being included in the deep, secret councils of the Godhead, the ultimate planning and governance of the universe, but Lucifer is excluded from those specific meetings.
Because he's a created being, not God.
Right. The objective reality is that Michael is God and Lucifer is a created angel. Therefore, Lucifer lacks the infinite capacity to participate in the divine council. But Lucifer, becoming infatuated with his own beauty and perfection, loses his perspective. He begins to nurse a grievance. He looks at his own brilliance and concludes, "This exclusion is an injustice. I am just as glorious as Michael. I should be in that room. I should be like the Most High."
It is the cosmic equivalent of toxic office politics. An executive feels they are being passed over for the inner circle, and that perceived slight ferments into resentment. But he didn't keep that grievance to himself. The infection spread, the mechanism by which it spread is incredibly revealing.
Verse 16 of Ezekiel chapter 28 exposes the methodology. It says, "By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned." The Hebrew word translated as trading or merchandise is rekula.
Rekula, what does that literally mean?
In a literal earthly sense, it means to peddle goods, to go from person to person buying and selling. But in a relational or political context, it means to peddle words. It is the act of slandering, gossiping, or running a whispering campaign.
So Lucifer takes his internal feeling of injustice and begins to canvass the angelic host. He starts peddling doubt.
Exactly. He engages in a cosmic smear campaign against the character of God. He goes around the heavenly sanctuary, whispering to the other angels, "Does God really have our best interests at heart? Is this administration truly fair? Why is Michael given preferential treatment while we are subjected to arbitrary rules?"
He's sowing seeds of suspicion regarding God's motives.
And because the angels had never encountered a lie before, because the environment was completely built on truth and trust, this rekula, this slander, was devastatingly effective. It ultimately fractures the heavenly host, leading to the event described in Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 11.
And war broke out in heaven.
Yes. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer.
If we step back and look at the trajectory of this conflict, the core issue wasn't simply a dispute over administrative hierarchy. The text argues that the ultimate prize Lucifer was fighting for was worship. He wanted the doxology that rightfully belonged only to the Creator.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, worship is the central axis of the cosmic war. And because the issue was worship, the literal battlefield had to be the sanctuary, the architectural center of cosmic doxology.
So he attacks the command center.
Satan's strategy, once his internal grievance fully materialized, was twofold. First, execute a direct attack against God's character to undermine his authority. And second, establish a rival, counterfeit sanctuary where he could intercept the worship intended for God.
The ultimate usurpation.
Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 18, Apple accuses Satan, saying, "You have defiled your sanctuaries," plural. Once Satan and his followers are cast out of the heavenly environment and relocated to earth, his entire operational playbook is dedicated to setting up counterfeit systems of worship that rival and obscure God's true heavenly sanctuary.
This transitions us perfectly into human history. When sin infects our world in Genesis chapter 3, the function of that heavenly command center has to fundamentally expand. It can no longer just be a place of doxology. It must become the headquarters for soteriology.
The cosmic rescue mission is activated.
Right. God's desire for fellowship remains, but now there is a lethal barrier of sin that must be dealt with. How does the crucifixion of Jesus, the historical event of Calvary, fit into this massive, ongoing cosmic sanctuary war?
The author provides a phenomenal historical analogy to clarify the timeline of the conflict. He describes Calvary as the D-Day of the cosmic war.
In the context of World War II, D-Day, the Allied invasion of Normandy, was the decisive battle. It was the moment the back of the Axis powers was effectively broken, ensuring their ultimate defeat. However, the war did not end on that specific day. There were still months of grueling, bloody conflict ahead.
That is the precise theological tension the New Testament operates within, often referred to as the Christus Victor motif. When Jesus died on the cross, he achieved the decisive, irreversible victory over Satan's rebellion.
He won the war right there.
Colossians chapter 2, verse 15, describing the aftermath of the cross, states, "Having disarmed principalities and powers, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it." The cross served as the ultimate altar of sacrifice in the cosmic sanctuary system. Hebrews chapter 8, verses 3 through 5, and Hebrews chapter 13, verse 10 draw a direct, unbroken line between Christ's sacrifice and the sanctuary typology.
It's all connected.
When John the Baptist points to Jesus in John chapter 1, verse 29 and declares, "Behold, The Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. He is confirming that Calvary is the antitype, the ultimate fulfillment of every animal sacrifice ever offered in the earthly courtyard. The blood was shed, the ransom was paid, the D-Day beachhead was secured.
But the analogy holds true regarding the aftermath. After D-Day, there were still mop-up operations. We look at the world today, centuries after the cross, and it is undeniably still a war zone. We see systemic evil, disease, death, and spiritual deception. If the decisive battle was won at Calvary, what is the current operational status of the heavenly sanctuary? What is Christ doing right now?
Following his ascension, Christ enters the heavenly sanctuary to apply the benefits of his D-Day victory, acting as our high priest. But remember Satan's twofold strategy: attack God's character and establish a counterfeit sanctuary. Since Satan cannot assault the heavenly sanctuary directly anymore, he focuses his attacks on the earthly perception of it.
He attacks the narrative.
Throughout church history, according to the prophetic frameworks of Daniel and Revelation, an antichrist power rises on earth to obscure Christ's heavenly ministry. Daniel chapter 8, verses 11 through 13, speaks of a power that exalts itself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down.
The Apostle Paul echoes this in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4, warning of a man of sin who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God.
The strategy is distraction and substitution. Satan uses earthly institutions, human traditions, and counterfeit systems of mediation to direct humanity's gaze away from Christ's active, ongoing ministry in the real heavenly command center. He wants us relying on human priests or our own works rather than the true high priest.
Exactly. The war transitions from a battle of physical sacrifice to a battle of truth and allegiance. To bring a final resolution to this extended conflict, the heavenly sanctuary enters a phase of judgment.
And Daniel gives us a window into that phase.
Daniel chapter 7, verses 9 and 10 provides a breathtaking, terrifyingly beautiful view of this proceeding. Daniel writes, I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. This describes a pre-Advent judgment taking place in the heavenly sanctuary prior to Christ's return.
The concept of judgment carries a lot of negative baggage in modern culture. For many believers, the idea of an investigative judgment feels punitive. It feels as if God is poring over the records looking for a technicality to keep us out of heaven. It induces anxiety.
Judgment definitely sounds scary to most people.
But when you contextualize the judgment within the broader narrative of the cosmic war, it completely reframes the event. The judgment is not an arbitrary condemnation of believers. It is the ultimate vindication.
Vindication for God.
Exactly. If you have been the victim of a malicious cosmic smear campaign, which God has been since Lucifer first started peddling Ricola, you don't fear the court date. You welcome it. The courtroom is where the books are opened, the evidence is presented, and the truth is established for the entire universe to see.
The truth comes out.
The judgment permanently vindicates God's character, proving that his justice and his mercy are perfectly aligned, and it definitively exposes the emptiness of Satan's slanders. Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 and 7 announces this process to the world as good news. Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and springs of water.
And all circles back to the original conflict. Worship.
The judgment is the necessary legal and moral process of cleaning up the universe before what the author calls VE Day. Victory in Europe, or in our cosmic timeline, victory in eternity. It ensures that sin will never ever rise a second time.
Which brings us to the ultimate resolution of the timeline, eternity in the new earth. But our source text tackles a fascinating paradox that appears at the very end of the biblical narrative. We have spent this entire deep dive establishing that the heavenly sanctuary is God's eternal home, that it existed before sin, and that it is central to the cosmic command structure.
It's the permanent reality.
Yet, when you turn to the final chapters of the Bible, describing the restored universe, there is a verse that seems to contradict everything we've discussed. In Revelation chapter 21, verse 22, the Apostle John is describing the New Jerusalem, and he writes, But I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. If the sanctuary is eternal, why does John explicitly say it's missing in the new earth?
It is a brilliant paradox that requires us to look very closely at the architectural details John provides. The author of our text breaks this down methodically. First, we must pay attention to John's exact phrasing. He does not say the sanctuary ceased to exist. He says he saw no temple in the city.
So it's not gone, it's just not a building inside the city.
We know the sanctuary must still exist in some form because just a few chapters earlier in Revelation chapter 7, verse 15, John describes the redeemed saints, stating, "Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple." The redeemed are actively serving in the temple. So how do we reconcile serving in a temple when the city has no temple in it?
The resolution has to do with the nature of the city itself.
Precisely. Let's look at Revelation chapter 21, verses 2 and 3. John sees the holy city, the New Jerusalem, descending out of heaven, and a loud voice from heaven announces, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them."
The tabernacle of God.
The Greek word translated as tabernacle there is skone, which is the exact specific word used throughout the Greek translation of the Old Testament for the sanctuary. The reason just could not locate a localized temple building inside the city is because the entire city of New Jerusalem is the tabernacle. The whole structure is the sanctuary.
The text highlights a massive mathematical clue in Revelation to support this. When the angel measures the city in Revelation chapter 21, verse 16, John notes a very specific, unusual proportion. Its length, breadth, and height are equal. The city is shaped like a perfect cube.
A perfect cube.
In the entirety of biblical architecture, there is only one other structure described as a perfect cube, the most holy place, the inner sanctum of the earthly tabernacle, where the localized presence of God resided, was a perfect cube.
The New Jerusalem is the apocalyptic realization, the massive cosmic expansion of the most holy place. The Emmanuel principle, God with us, is finally permanently realized in its fullest dimension. God's presence is no longer veiled behind a curtain or confined to a small room. His unshielded glory will literally illuminate the entire city.
And what about the physical sun? Because John says they don't need it.
People often read Revelation chapter 21, verse 23, and chapter 22, verse 5, which say the city has no need of the sun because the glory of God illuminates it, and they assume the physical sun is destroyed. But our text points out that the prophet Isaiah, in chapter 30, verse 26, suggests the sun will still exist in the new earth and actually shines 7 times brighter.
So the sun is still there.
The point John is making in Revelation isn't that the solar system loses its star. It's that inside the New Jerusalem, the unmediated, unveiled glory of the Creator is so intensely brilliant that it completely eclipses the light of a sun. The light of the command center outshines the solar system.
So what does this all mean? Synthesizing everything we've covered today, from the pre-creation existence of the sanctuary, the fall of Lucifer, the cross, the ongoing judgment, and finally, the reality of the New Jerusalem. How does this massive theological framework reshape the daily reality of a believer? If we take these concepts out of the theoretical realm, they have profound practical implications for how we live, pray, and view the future. Let's weave through the major takeaways the text presents, starting with that foundational Emmanuel principle. How should the knowledge that God built a sanctuary before sin was even an issue change our daily approach to him?
It radically shifts our understanding of God's baseline disposition toward us. If you believe God only interacts with humanity to manage our sin, your relationship with him will always feel transactional and slightly tense. You'll constantly wonder if he is merely tolerating you. But the Emmanuel principle proves that God's ultimate driving desire is intimacy. He constructed a home because he genuinely wants to dwell with his creation. When you pray, you aren't trying to get the attention of a distant, annoyed deity. You are speaking to a creator whose primary objective has always been to be close to you.
Takeaway number 2. The nature of that future closeness is incredibly grounding. Because the sanctuary is a spatio-temporal reality made of heavenly stuff, our eternal hope is anchored in something tangible. We aren't looking forward to losing our physical bodies and floating as formless consciousnesses in a digital or ethereal cloud. We are anticipating living in a vibrant, dense, physically real home, a place with real geography, real fellowship, and real tactile experiences. It validates the goodness of physical creation.
That tangible reality also grounds our understanding of worship, which is our third takeaway. Because we recognize that doxology preceded soteriology, we realize that worship isn't just a temporary mechanism to say thank you for salvation. Praise is the eternal, original heartbeat of the cosmos. It was the primary activity of the universe before the fall, and it will be the primary activity after sin is eradicated. That means when we engage in sincere worship today, we aren't just practicing a religious ritual. We are participating in the eternal purpose of our existence. We are tuning our hearts to the frequency of the unfallen universe.
Number 4 makes me think deeply about the eternal nature of Christ's mediation. We discussed how the Son of God voluntarily condescended to bridge the infinite gap between Creator and creation long before humanity failed. If Jesus was willing to step into that mediating role when everything was perfect, simply out of love for his creation, how much more secure should we feel knowing he mediates for us now in our brokenness? His mediation wasn't a reluctant chore he took on because we ruined things. It is the expression of his core character.
And recognizing the scope of his mediation leads us to our fifth point. It helps us understand the true nature of the cosmic conflict we are living through. The war that began in the heavenly sanctuary wasn't just a political struggle for power, it was a battle over worship and allegiance. That reframes our daily ethical and spiritual choices. Our decisions regarding what we value, what media we consume, how we treat others, and where we direct our devotion aren't just isolated moral choices. Every day, we are taking a side in a literal, ongoing cosmic war. We are either directing doxology toward the Creator or allowing our worship to be intercepted by the adversary's counterfeits.
Speaking of the adversary's tactics, takeaway number 6. The mechanism of Lucifer's fall offers a severe warning for our own communities. Sin didn't begin with an act of violence. It began in a perfectly flawless environment, through an internal grievance that manifested as racula slander, gossip, and the peddling of suspicion. If Satan could successfully fracture a perfect heavenly community through a whispering campaign, we must be aggressively vigilant in guarding our own hearts, our families, and our churches against the toxic nature of gossip and unwarranted suspicion. It is the original, most destructive weapon in the enemy's arsenal.
But while we must be vigilant against those tactics, takeaway 7 reminds us we do not have to live in fear of the outcome. Understanding the cross as the D-Day of the cosmic war changes how we engage in spiritual warfare. When we face intense spiritual opposition, temptation, or despair, we must remember that we are not fighting for victory. We are fighting from a position of victory. Christ has already disarmed the principalities and powers at Calvary. The decisive battle is won. The enemy is operating on borrowed time and restricted power.
Number 8. Beware of counterfeit worship. Satan's entire strategy is to distract and substitute. We have to stay grounded in the biblical reality of the heavenly sanctuary, so we aren't led astray by earthly systems claiming divine authority.
Which naturally leads into the 9th takeaway. That D-Day victory gives us the confidence to face the final phases of the war, including the reality of the pre-Advent judgment. When we reframe judgment as the process of cosmic vindication rather than arbitrary condemnation, it removes the paralyzing fear that often accompanies end-time theology. If we are covered by the blood of the D-Day victor, the judgment is simply the beautiful, necessary legal procedure where the universe is swept clean of Satan's lies. It is the moment God's character is fully vindicated and cosmic harmony is permanently restored.
And finally, takeaway 10. All of this culminates in that ultimate invitation extended by Jesus in John chapter 14. He told his disciples, "Let not your heart be troubled. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you." Given everything we've unpacked about the sanctuary, that promise is breathtakingly literal.
It is entirely literal.
The Father's house is the heavenly sanctuary, the cosmic command center. The Greek word for mansions refers to dwelling places or rooms. Jesus is effectively saying, I am going to the most holy place and I am preparing a specific room for you. The ultimate reality of the New Jerusalem is that the Creator of the universe is inviting us to move into his eternal home, to live with him in the Holy of Holies forever. That reframes the entire arc of the biblical narrative. God built a house so he could invite us in. When the world feels chaotic or when our own lives feel unstable, knowing that there is a permanent, tangible room being prepared for us in the absolute center of reality is the ultimate anchor for hope.
It truly is. And as we conclude our exploration of this massive cosmic architecture, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought regarding your own participation in this reality. This raises an important question for you to explore on your own. Consider the fact that the heavenly sanctuary is not a dormant museum. It is a fully functioning, highly active command center right now. At this exact moment, the angelic host and the unfallen beings are actively engaged in the doxology that has echoed since the beginning of time. So when you choose to sing a hymn of praise, or when you simply bow your head to pray in the quiet of your living room today, realize that you are not just performing an isolated religious activity on a small, distant planet, you are actually physically and spiritually linking into a cosmic worship service that is happening right this second in the throne room of the universe.
What a staggering reality. Your living room connecting directly to the command center of the cosmos. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sanctuary. Keep asking those profound questions. Keep seeking the broader context of the theology you read. And never forget that the God of the universe built an eternal home with the express purpose of inviting you inside. We will catch you next time.